Mansi, your help here.
Okay, I see this share screen. I'm able to get it. All right. Okay, so pardon me for 1 second as I make this a little bit more bearable for you. Hopefully it's full screen and you can see the whole thing now. Okay. So what we did was something a little bit unique at the time, 10 years ago when we started this work, but it has grown in popularity first, in the United States and now all over the world, and in India, it's becoming really popular too. And it's using oral history to document history, because in the past, for hundreds of years, well, at least the societies where history was being captured, it was usually captured by a few scholars and people who maybe had limited experiences. And it was usually, sort of like the really big headlining events that were captured. It was, what one king did or what one leader did. But a lot of history and a lot of what happens is actually, collective effort of the people. Basically, a lot of people, everybody contributes to making history what it is. And you can't truly understand what's happening if you don't understand what happened across classes, across castes, across geography. So you get a very limited sort of perspective of history, the kind of history that I was taught in school had a somewhat of a limited perspective. And so oral history today is becoming a means of capturing voices from all strata of society, especially groups that have been left out, which is, it turns out, most of humanity. Okay, just figuring out how to use the scroll feature on Zoom. So I'll give you a little bit of my background. I was born in India. I come from Punjab, so I spent a lot of time growing up near the Wagah border. In fact, visiting the Wagah border, it was like kind of one of those fun summer day things my cousins and I did as a kid. We would just go there, wave at the guards, and at the time you didn't have this elaborate infrastructure there. It was literally just a fence with no man's land, and we used to go and wave at the Pakistani guards. They were super friendly, and we used to talk about how our family had come from the other side. So I was born in Delhi, and my dad was in the army. So I lived in all these different places. I lived in Leh, in Ladakh, when it was just a village. And it was basically just military people and the local population. And then I lived in Kashmir, so very, close to the conflict there. Lived in Jammu and then Pune, Chandigarh, and then over to the United States in the 90s. And so I'm kind of, I guess, a cultural mutt in that way, but I had enough of an exposure in my early days to this history, or this connection to this history, that, it remained a big question mark in my life. So what happened in 1947? Well, I'm not going to give you the full history. There's a lot of books that have been written about the official stuff that happened at the time, the decision-making that led to the kind of big breakdown in society that we saw. But, if I were to summarize it, we've had uprisings and freedom movements for a very long time in South Asia. Now, I won't call it India, because before 1947, you didn't really have in India. You had British occupied regions that they called India. Remember that this was a European terminology. And then you had the indigenous kingdoms that were there, the states. And yes, a lot of the states were protectorates. So they had an agreement with the British India that was very similar in nature to what, sort of Japan has today with the United States. But that doesn't mean that Japan is part of the United States. So that distinction is really interesting, especially when we do our interviews and we interview people who were from the princely states. They seem to have a very different perspective of India compared to people who lived within the British Indian states. And so as we're going into 1947, the British can no longer quell these uprisings that are happening within South Asia that, you've probably heard of the 1857, some call it the first Freedom War, some call it the Mutiny. So these uprisings were going on every time, some of the kingdoms would fall to the British. But after World War II, they no longer had the resources to really quell these, and they wanted to get out as fast as possible, because I think they were also afraid of what was going to happen when these uprisings, this revolution, freedom revolution got out of hand. So they pulled out as fast as possible. And then we have the entire history of how the Radcliffe line was designed. There's a lot of literature out there about that. You probably know it was done very hastily. And Mr. Radcliffe, was flown in because he didn't have an emotional connect with South Asia. And so he was flown in to kind of use census data that was collected and which we now know was inaccurate, to draw this line, which went through people's farms, went through people's homes, went through all kinds of structures. And there was a lot of confusion around this line. Actually, before I go into the statistics of partition, I'll also say something. When this confusion was happening, one of the reasons that we've learned through our work why this mass violence broke out is you literally had a breakdown of the police and military services. So you imagine what would happen today in any big city if you took away the police and military. And suddenly you also had a democracy. So you had these new politicians, they were vying for power in their constituencies. And there was a lot of incentive for them to drive out people who were unlikely to vote for them. And often that was people of the opposite religion or a different religion than them. And we've also found from talking to a lot of perpetrators that a lot of the impetus for the violence was actually loot. People usually attacked the wealthier communities, and they did it because they were promised loot, finders, keepers. And so at least that's from talking to a lot of the perpetrators of what was in their minds, that led them to this violence. So going into the statistics, nearly 1% of the world's population became refugees at the time, and 14% of the world's people were impacted directly. So everywhere in South Asia was impacted because refugees went everywhere. So even if you didn't have to migrate and you didn't have violence in your town, you had Punjabis and Sindhis and Bengalis coming up and setting up shops over there, or you had local people that migrated. That's what we found from our work. And so imagine if we had not documented the Holocaust and if we had not documented Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now this is a motivation that, now it seems obvious why we should document partition, but 10 years ago when we started this work, it was a dead memory and no one was talking about it. So it took an immense effort to convince people that this was actually an important documentation that we needed to do. My personal inspiration came from Hiroshima. I had been thinking about, partition for a very long time, in fact, my whole life, because I grew up knowing my family had come from the other side. And I wondered why I couldn't go to the other side, why, especially when I was in my 20s, I was a little bit of a globetrotter. So I was traveling all over the world and wondering why I couldn't go to Lahore, my family's ancestral city, why it was so difficult. And so there was a lot of curiosity around partition, and I didn't know what to do about it. I wanted to do something about it to bridge the disconnect between the folk history I heard and the completely, missing story of partition in our textbooks. And so the aha moment came when I was at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial. They have an incredibly powerful archive of oral histories. And this is back in 2008. And I was so deeply moved. I was like, okay, I get it. We need to get our grandparents and parents' voices out there because they're the ones who experienced this and they're the ones who can tell it in a way that nobody can deny. Problem in 2008, there were no sources of primary witness accounts. The remaining witnesses were in their 80s and above. It was a dwindling population. There was a great urgency and people were dispersed all over the globe. So that led us to come up with this solution of crowdsourcing. It's not a coincidence that I was at the Berkeley Physics Department where the term crowdsourcing was actually coined around that time, I think 2007. It was coined, in fact, the people won the Nobel Prize for the protein solving problem, which is what they used it for. Won't go into the details of that, but we used the same concept for crowdsourcing oral history. And it was sort of the first time anyone had done it for a social science, but it's becoming more and more popular now. So this image on the left, you can't really see it probably if you're on a screen, but it's millions of little tiny stick figures building a rainbow together. I've been inspired by this painting since I was a kid, and I always told myself that one day If I were to help build something, I'd love to bring a lot of people together to build something greater than ourselves for the benefit of society. That's kind of how I interpreted this image. And it formed the early inspiration of the idea of crowdsourcing. So we've been doing that since 2009. I left my job in 2013 at the Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And to give you an overview of our mission, it's to document, preserve, and share eyewitness accounts from all ethnic, religious, and socioeconomic communities impacted by the partition of British India. Now, why that's important is 10 years ago, and it's actually even true in India today and Pakistan as well, Bangladesh as well, that, in the early days, people used to say to us, like, okay, well, if you're Punjabi, why are you recording Sindhi stories? Or if you're, Muslim, why are you recording Sikh stories? And those kind of things would come up. People were like really shocked that we would care about these stories regardless of religion and ethnicity. I think it was, a lot of it was being one, a military kid, and second, having grown up in the US where everything's much more egalitarian and you don't pigeonhole people based on their religion. And I mean, we still have those problems here, but they're not as big as they are in South Asia. So having this in our mission statement was very, very important in our early days. And now people have come to accept this platform as sort of all-encompassing and for everybody. So crowdsourcing, we started teaching oral history classes with the help of the regional oral history office at UC Berkeley. We were very lucky to have those resources in the Bay Area and Stanford University's history department. And we started teaching them online back, very early on, 2010, even before we were an organization. And what was really cool about this approach is that not only was it fast, we didn't have to raise millions of dollars to go out and do this work, which is how it would have been done traditionally. You'd have scholars being paid, full-time jobs going out there and doing this work, but we didn't have that kind of money when this work started. And doing it, through crowdsourcing was fast. It was frugal. We had global reach through the internet. So this, part of the reason this work is happening is because of the internet. And it was really engaging. Suddenly, young people were interviewing family members or community members. Stories were beginning to spread in the community, and this dead history started to come to life in a really big way. Just some images of when we first started our work. We were doing some test runs, if you will. We launched a scholarship to do this work, some of this work, especially in rural areas where crowdsourcing is not as accessible. And so before we ran the scholarship, we did a test run. So this is in the walled city of Amritsar. We spent several weeks there, myself and Ranjan Preet, who was another person living in Berkeley at the time, and she joined as a volunteer in those early days. And we went shop to shop looking for elders to interview. And it was an amazing experience because some of these shops are passed down in the same family for like 300 years, something that, we don't really know about. So this is us in the Bay Area. We taught classes at UC Berkeley in the early days. We tried to go to every single South Asian event. We went to mosques, we went to, mandirs, we went to gurdwaras, we went everywhere that we possibly could to spread the word. So it was super grassroots in the early days and completely volunteer run because, as a postdoc, I didn't really have like a nest egg or anything saved up to kind of invest in this. So here's how it works. So we train citizen historians online through these workshops, which I'm proud to say we've now taught every other week for the last 7 years straight without stopping. And we've taught over 7,000 people how to do this. People come on, they learn how to record these stories, they upload them, and then they share them in the community. We do a lot of social media sharing, and that has actually been another big vehicle of doing this work. So it's gotten a lot more people to come forward. In fact, social media has helped popularize the history of partition. So we got about 1 million followers on Facebook around 2016, 2017. That number has gone down because Facebook changed their algorithms and they want us to pay a lot of money now to get followers, and as a nonprofit, we don't really follow that. So our growth has sort of slowed down because of that. But anyway, on Facebook in 2017, we had 10 million shares, more than 10 million shares of the stories we shared. So you could kind of see organically how this history started to spread really widely all over the world through social media and very subtly, just through these postings of individual stories, and thousands of them. And that created a new awareness. And so 2017, 2018, you started to get other projects coming up on partition, which has been pretty neat to watch. So stories are recorded from all over the world. And we had to make this image several years ago. People didn't understand this concept of a cloud-based archive. So stories come in from all over the world. They're stored in our cloud. And also we have several backups in various locations. We have an office in Delhi and we have an office in Berkeley where we manage the collection from and the entire process. In fact, we're very highly volunteer run. So a lot of our team members are volunteers, but they're like very sort of very serious volunteer positions. And we've recorded actually now over 9,500 stories. We started out at the time of our founding with a goal of 10,000 oral histories. This makes us one of the top 5 largest oral history archives in the world. I think we may be the 3rd largest historical oral history archive. So this doesn't account for something like StoryCorps, which is not historical, but they do folklore. So we've over 600 citizen historians who've been confirmed. So we have a lot of people who take our classes, but they're not confirmed eventually. These people are certified. They've helped document these 9,500 oral histories. They've come from, actually now we're up to 15 countries. We're up to over 500 cities and villages represented, and we're over 40 languages and dialects. So, on our website, you'll see a map. If you click on one of the links, I do apologize for those of you guys in the tech world. Our website was built in 2011. So it's very, very old. In fact, if any of you want to donate your time and build us a new website, you're most welcome. So it has an old look, but it serves the purpose as of now. So if you click on a city, you'll see where people migrated to. You can click on, individual stories. And if we have a video up on YouTube, you can watch their video. Otherwise, you can, click on these photos, look at them. You can read their story, an excerpt of it. Also, what's cool, we're working with Stanford University Libraries. They're going to be disseminating our collections to universities around the world and to academics. And we have an initial set of universities in India and Pakistan that are already on board. And we've actually just launched a scholarship in collaboration with Tata Trust in India for researchers to come and access the collection at the Indian universities that you see here. University of Delhi, Guru Nanak Dev University, and Ashoka University. So the archive is actively in use right now. We're in 2 museums, we've got exhibits in 2 museums, permanent exhibits, one in the Canadian Museum of Human Rights and one in the Virasat-e-Khalsa Museum in Punjab. We've also been featured in a number of documentaries. So if you guys saw the BBC One documentary, My Family, Partition and Me, very popular documentary. We actually helped them pro bono at the time because that's what we did at the time several years ago. Most of the people interviewed in that documentary, or a lot of people interviewed in that documentary, are from the Partition Archive. There are films like Bharat, that have been inspired by the oral histories in the Partition Archive. And if you look at Bhag Milkha Bhag, the makers have told me that they referenced some of our oral histories that were posted online when they made that film, which was really amazing to hear. And there have been a number of plays and artistic works, and also, of course, a lot of research articles, and thus far 27 PhDs that have used the work of the Partition Archive. Actually, there's probably more now, 27 as of at least a year ago. And Erin is one of them. She's going to talk about that in a moment. Some of our learnings, I'll just show you a couple of photos. Hopefully I'm not too much over time. I know I kind of went into a few details there, more than I expected. So this is in the Sundarbans, March 2018. We interviewed this gentleman who was 108 years old. It was fascinating. It was my first time in the Sundarbans. I think it is a paradise. It is very rough, but just really beautiful. And it's a lot of lessons to learn from there. So what's really kind of sad is that a lot of people who live there today, about 4 million of them, they live in areas where even the indigenous population would not live. They were settled there, a lot of them by force. Way back, they were partition refugees. because they were sort of in the lower strata of society. They ended up being given that land. And now those 4 million people are becoming our first climate refugees because that land is going underwater because of the climate crisis. And so it was really interesting to interview this gentleman because he moved there in 47 thinking that there was a lot of opportunity because it was somewhat of a sold as a land of opportunity because they thought that they were going to be able to farm and do all sorts of things, but it turned out to be very different. In fact, now you have the tiger widow crisis. So when we were roaming around there, a lot of, if you see the women here who don't have the red vermilion, it means that their widows, their husbands have been attacked by tigers. It's because the people are not, native to this region, and there's a lot of human wildlife conflict, and that's kind of had its issues, so to speak. So another story going on the other side of the globe, this is in California. This gentleman, he was based in Rodeo at the time when we interviewed him in California. He was 107 when I interviewed him about almost 8 years ago. He's unfortunately no more. And he told us a fascinating story where he was still boycotting tea because when they were growing up, and this is, in before 1920, when they were growing up, they considered tea to be something that the British were using to spike their milk to get them addicted so that the East India Company could sell them tea. So he still boycotted tea to this day because to him that was boycotting the East India Company. And he said until they came around, at least where he was in Punjab, they didn't drink tea. Tea was not a staple drink that it is today. So ultimately, given how I grew up seeing tea as this very staple South Asian drink, I guess the East India Company succeeded in their work in spreading tea across South Asia. A lot of gharanas were broken at the time of partition. I'm forgetting the name of this particular interviewee, but we've interviewed a lot of gharanas, people belonging to different gharanas. When we think of Northern India now, we don't think of music. Like when you think of Punjab, you don't think of music and arts. It's because those sectors pretty much were killed at the time of partition. You had a lot of gharanas that broke up. You had artists that were uprooted and moved across the borders. And a lot of them became really destabilized. They lost their art because they were trying to survive and they became laborers and things like that. So there's a huge disruption in the arts and culture space due to partition. There's a lot of lost languages that are appearing in the archive. For example, this gentleman from the Northwest Frontier area, somebody who speaks Torwali language, which is a disappearing language, interviewed a number of elders in his community who were impacted by the border between what's now Afghanistan and Pakistan. So that border too, at the time of partition, was defined, and it had its impact in those regional communities. So that was a really interesting finding. Here, Erin, I had to stick this picture up here because Erin's going to be speaking. She can talk about this interview more later, but she's interviewing a gentleman who belongs to the ancient Jewish community, I believe, in India. So a lot of, there's a very ancient Jewish community in Cochin, I think from almost 2,000 years ago, and many of them had migrated across South Asia, living in places like Lahore and Karachi. At the time of partition, many of them migrated to the Bombay area. And then in 1948, they migrated to Israel because of the builders movement. So Sanjeev, if my time is up, we can move on.
Yeah, I think we should, Guneeta. This is extremely informative and fascinating. But, I know we have a couple of other great speakers, and then our attendees would love to engage as well.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Guneeta. If you want to go ahead and introduce the next speaker.
Yeah, sure. So let me go ahead and introduce Mr. Jasbir Bhatia. So I've known Jasbir uncle now for quite some time. He was one of our earliest supporters when we did, back in 2013, when I left my job and we did the first founding donor round at $5,000 seed. So Mr. Jasbir Bhatia not only came forward into this experimental project as an interviewee, and he volunteered his story, but he came forward as a founding donor, but he also went the extra mile and he became an an interviewer. So he trained as a citizen historian, and he's been going out and setting an example for a lot of the younger people and recording oral histories, which has been amazing. And now I'll read his official bio. Mr. Jasbir Bhatia was born in December 1940 in Sialkot, Punjab, now Pakistan. He migrated to India during partition in August 1947 and shared the pain and suffering what millions of others went through during India's most tragic period of modern history. He had to walk his way to India along with his family. His parents had to leave all of their assets back there, therefore went through a hard life growing up. He studied engineering and worked in Bharat Heavy Electricals for 14 years and migrated to the United States in 1977. He was introduced to the Partition Archive in 2014. Okay, I was wrong. It wasn't 2013, it was 2014. So I'm gonna hand over the mic now to Mr. Jasbir Bhatia.
Hello, good evening. I hope everybody's doing well. Thank you so much, Guneeta ji. You have almost said what I have prepared to say. So anyhow, a few thoughts of my side. First of all, I'd like to thank 1947 Partition Archive and Indiaspora for the opportunity to participate in this program and for the great effort to highlight the important work being done by the archive. Now, time is a great healer, as they say, but the old wounds leave their scars. I was attending a TICON conference in Santa Clara in May 2014 when I saw 1947 Partition Archive showcased in the conference exhibitions. My curiosity immediately grew, and I talked to the people there. They hurriedly arranged my interview with Ms. Dina Kapoor from the archive the next day, and I was asked to narrate the story of my migration. I was born in December 1940 in Sialkot, now in Pakistan, and walked to India along with the parents and two other siblings. It took us 6 terrible long days without much of food and water because there were dead bodies in wells and ponds. And we crossed River Ravi and made it to Dera Baba Nanak on the Indian side of the river. It seemed a very daunting task to recollect my experience as a child, then 67 years later. But I surprised myself when the memory of the whole journey unfolded, and I spoke almost for 1.5 hours. We left our home in a rush in the middle of the night because a mob attack on the village was imminent. So the family lost all assets. We came with just the clothes on our back. The same night, our home was looted and set on fire. There was no going back as our family had hoped. It was a hard life growing up in India. Because our family had felt, no, we will go away from the village for the night and we'll come back in the morning. There was no such thing. That morning never came. I was impressed by the work of the archive and realized the importance of it. So with the humble contribution, I became the founder donor and then also a citizen historian to collect more stories. You know, it's heartbreaking to record the painful stories of the survivors who suffered in many ways during the massive exodus from one homeland to a new one. 10 to 15 million people were uprooted, and over 1 million people died for whom freedom never came. Looking back at my own experiences and that of others, I now see it like a case studies of human behavior in different circumstances. In my case, we were to cross a town called Narowal, and the street we walked through had for me knee-deep water, knee-deep mud, apparently purposely created by the mobsters to slow us down. Halfway through, I saw someone slowly pouring drinking water from a brass utensil over a courtyard boundary wall. For safety of the person, for safety the person could not be seen, but only his fingers holding the utensils. A few people drank the water, Others did not because they thought the water might be poisoned. And as we moved on, at the end of the street, there was a huge mob standing there with all kind of, primitive weapons, axes and kirpans, and swords and spears and anything, whatever they had, to basically attack on us and kill people. Fortunately, we had a small contingent of soldiers under a British officer, and they were located strategically, and they were holding the crowd back. I remember I tried to wash my legs because I was wearing shorts. In the water, there was a pond there, and they said, no, you have to get fast, go away, don't stop here. They would not even let us clean our legs. There was so much mud, and there were rocks and whatever underneath. So this told me the two faces of the human character. One was a noble Muslim, and the other side, a stark evil group of people. The same community, same people, same families. And that scene has been imprinted on my mind ever since. And it was the most remarkable thing which I have ever seen in my life. There are many other cases, since I have collected many stories. Similar cases happened with other people. In one of the cases, a friend of mine, Mr. Indra, they had to walk from Lahore to India on foot. They had a family, they had a grandfather, his mother and his uncles. On the way, he recalls that there was this bullock cart on which the dead bodies of the parents were lying there. And his child, maybe a year and a half, approximately, to his imagination, he was sitting looking at his parents. And also he was looking at the people walking by. And he recalls, nobody ever bothered to pick up that child. The child was so tired, maybe he lost the energy even to cry. Going further, the grandfather needed a stick to walk. And the stick, in India, they have stick with the handle was a little bit of silver on it, golden, silver coated. And there was a Baluch army. Even that they snatched away from him because there was some silver on it. That was the cruelty those people suffered. And it was the military who was trying to rob people. So ultimately, the grandfather could not walk as fast as the other could. And one point he recalls that I was very thirsty, and I told my mom, I am very thirsty. So she could not find water, and yet she saw some small pond. And she went there, she folded her dupatta, her coverage, her shawl, in 7 layers and tried to filter some water. And she saw a dead body in the pond. So that's what the water he could drink. And she was beckoning to her family and brothers, please hold on, please wait for me, I'm coming. But nobody bothered, they just kept on. The same family who would be just carrying each other so much, but in those adverse circumstances, everybody was for oneself. And now when they reached India, they reached Batala, and their grandfather did not show up. They searched for him 2 days. He did not show up. And they even hired people to try to find him, but no. Ultimately, the grandfather slowly trekked along, and after 2 days, he showed up and came back with the family. Some people had to fight back. One Mr. Surya, Mr. Dillon, they were held up in Sagoda for 2 months. And they said every night there was firing from each side. We had guns. We would fire on the other side because they were supposed to get army from India and they did not come. And when they will go to the town to buy some food, people will keep the money and not give them any food. And those are the kind of stories which we had to hear and reflect upon them. What is the human nature? But there are some people who just survived just by luck. Case of Dr. Rahmani, they were from northwest Punjab, and they wanted to come to India. They wanted to board a train. They came to the railway station, and the train had just left. So they were left behind. So what happened is the train came back because the train had some soldiers on them, and some soldier was possibly left behind. So the train had gone ahead, and they came back, and they were able to board that train. And they told us that in the subsequent train, everybody was killed in it. So it was just a sheer luck, certain divine power behind it, or whatever we can call it. That's how they made to India. So these are some of the stories, so difficult to really assimilate, really internalize. But there's endless stories, and it's very difficult even to record these stories. Some stories, most often people break down, emotionally break down, they start crying. Even me, I start crying, because when you hear somebody's story, when you relate yourself with your own story, then the whole scene comes back. So this is some of the experiences I have. And I could go on a long time if the time permits. How much more time I have? I thought I was supposed to speak for 8-10 minutes. But this is what the gist of experience is. And naturally, we had a very hard life growing in India. My father had virtually left everything. But since he was educated, he was able to get a job and work his way up. But it has been a very painful experience going through. We left our homes, which were our homes for ancestors for centuries, and suddenly it was no more ours. I hope that this archive serves as a lesson for the future generations who will read these stories and realize that making such reckless political decisions has consequences, and perhaps those who will grow up with these stories, they'll be better informed if they become politicians someday. This helps them to make better decisions how to deal with mankind and not make decisions for their own political benefits. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Uncle. Thank you for sharing that. And, I share your hope on that for the future, especially a lot of young people who can get a deep grasp of this history. And, some of them will grow up to become the next generation of leaders. And in order to avoid this in the future, you have to know what happened in the past and what went wrong. So we haven't done that yet collectively, in South Asia. And I think we can help as an archive, we can help push us in that direction. So next, I would like to introduce Dr. Erin Riggs. So Dr. Erin Riggs, I met Erin a long time ago. I think she joined us in 2013, and she joined us as a digital archivist volunteer. That program has run as a volunteer-based program for since inception, basically. So basically, a lot of archivists will sit in our office, and now it's remote. As the stories arrive into the digital cloud, they sort them. They spend a couple of hours on each story, making sure all the metadata is there, the videos are okay, and then they do all the communication with the interviewees and so on. So that's what archiving entails. So Erin joined us in that position, and then she stayed with us later she reconnected with us as a researcher. Her work as an archivist inspired her to define a very sort of groundbreaking research project that nobody had thought of on partition. And she found a mentor who would take her on, and she eventually got a Fullbright Scholarship to go to India. Now I'm going to read her official bio. So Erin Riggs received her Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and Geography at the University of California in Berkeley in 2013, and her MA and PhD degrees from Binghamton University Anthropology in 2015 and 2020, respectively. Erin specializes in contemporary archaeology, focusing on displacement in the recent past and material negotiations of national belonging. Her studies and research in India have been supported by the Fullbright Narrows Student Research Grant and the US State Department's Critical Language Scholarship. She's currently a research associate at Binghamton University and has been involved with the 1947 Partition Archive in various capacities since 2013. So over to you, Erin.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Guneeta. I am just going to pull up my slides here. Uh-oh. Can you see them yet?
There's a little share screen button at the bottom. Yeah.
Here we go. I think I got it now. Can everyone see?
Yep.
Yes, okay, perfect. So I want to talk a little bit today about how beyond being this really important repository of witness accounts, the Partition Archive is also a group that really works to engage the public in both partition histories, but also an interest in South Asian communities and histories in general. And it's also a resource of what's quickly becoming a disappearing asset to researchers, which is partition witness accounts. And it's also a community of tons of really active people who are all really interested in this history and in learning about people's lives who come from families who were impacted by this history. So to illustrate these 3 points, I want to talk about how they featured within my own experience. When I first became involved with the archive, I really knew not very much about partition. Even though I grew up in California, it's kind of surprising because there's such a huge community of prominent South Asians in California, but in Californian high schools, you actually learn relatively little about this history. And even though I was very involved in studying oral history as an undergraduate student, and even specifically displacement, so I had worked on interviewing people who had been interned in Japanese internment camps as an undergraduate student. But even though I was kind of focused in theoretically similar areas, I really didn't know very much about the partition. So when I had this position, I was really overwhelmed by how massive the impact of this historic event had been. And in addition to working as an intern, I also became a volunteer oral historian and started interviewing people both in California. And then once I relocated to New York, I continued to interview people in New York. And it was amazing to me how so many people within your communities, your neighbors, you never had to go very far to find a family that had been directly impacted by this history. So I think this really illustrates how the Partition Archive, beyond being this resource that researchers can use in the future, is really educating the public through events, through just its visibility about South Asia in general, but specifically partition histories, which is such an important history. This interest really led me through collecting interviews to focus specifically on how partition refugees interacted with homes. And I did my own work doing oral histories in Delhi, but I think that doing my own oral history work really highlighted to me why the Partition Archive is such a valuable asset for the future. Because if you're a researcher like me and you're collecting oral histories, you're very focused on mining data associated with a very niche particular subject. So I wanted to talk to people about how they interacted with homes, how they obtained homes after migration. But the information I was collecting, while it was really helpful to my dissertation, it could never be used by any other researcher in the future because it is so particular. And while I didn't use the archive's stories within my dissertation, they were extremely helpful to me because I ended up working with many of their volunteer oral historians who had a lot of experience working in Delhi. And the reason why this collection of people knew so much and were able to help me is because the archive is set up not just to collect accounts about the moment of migration, but really people's entire life worlds. So the question packets are oriented around asking people about what their everyday lives were like before migration and after migration. It's not just this one dramatic, eventful moment. It's really a person's whole life experience from 70 years since they experienced this event. And so because of this, oral historians who had worked for the archive were able to direct me, a researcher who is interested, towards really being able to pinpoint specific areas that were relevant about thinking about particular types of housing in the city. So I think that's an important distinction to remember when you think about what the archive is trying to achieve versus what a researcher might be trying to achieve through oral history, and why it is producing something that's so much more valuable for the future than just one particular project. Beyond being a resource and public engagement, the archive is really a community. There's so many people who are connected on social media, but also through the archive's listservs networks, and it helps connect people with similar interests. And to kind of illustrate this, I became really close friends with Zahida Rehman Jat, who's actually an archaeologist who works in Pakistan, through her involvement in Partition's listservs. And it was so unlikely that the two of us would have become friends. We've still never met in person, actually. But we've co-authored papers together, and we got married the same year. We've sent each other gifts in the mail. And our interests are so similar. They both focus on how migrations of people at the time of the partition changed built landscapes, and how that involves understandings about belonging and also heritage. And just to show how the archive can really stimulate research interest in a myriad of ways that maybe wasn't thought about initially, both Zahida and I together have published papers. Our most recent one was in the Journal of Social Archaeology, which is a pretty prominent theory-focused journal in our field. And our work in this particular paper focused on Zahida's family's partition story. She actually migrated herself, and she was raised in a building in Pakistan that had previously been a Sikh community building. And her family had tended a dargah back in India since time immemorial, since before anyone could remember. But she wasn't sure if this dargah still existed. And she wasn't able to travel to India because of the difficulty of traveling back and forth between countries. But I was able to connect her with the Sikh community that now still maintains the dargah. It's still very well cared for. And interestingly, the Sikh community building in which Zahida was raised, they've maintained it. And as you can see in the photo on the right, they've even preserved some Gurumukhi script and kept it intact, kind of out of respect for previous residents. And both the family that now tends for the dargah and Zahida were able to speak with each other over the phone as a result of our investigations into this history and how people interact with spaces. So I think this really goes to show that in addition to preserving these really important stories, the archive is really immediately creating this vast global interest in these histories and helping connect people with similar interests. That's it.
Thank you so much, Erin. I guess over to Sanjeev.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Guneeta, Erin, Jasbir. Very informative, but also incredibly moving, Jasbir, especially in your case. What a powerful story. I'd like to now invite everyone to participate, all our attendees who are online. What I would ask you is, if you have a question, please raise your hand in the app, in the Zoom app, not physically on the screen. There's too many of you for me to see at a glance. But please raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we'll direct your unmute you and have you direct your questions to any of the speakers that you may wish. I'll give it a few seconds for people to start raising their hands and asking questions. I see one for Consul General of India in New York, Randhir Jaiswal. Randhir, we invite you to come on the screen and ask your question, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Sanjeev. This was a beautiful session, very engaging, and it's very important that we not only understand partition, but also document it for reasons of what we have to do, how society has to progress, and what we have to learn from history, and how we are going to shape the narrative into the future. So all the three speakers made excellent presentation. I come from Bihar, and Bihar was equally impacted by the partition. It's for people who have a side view of partition, somehow miss this point. A lot of people from rural Bihar, from North Bihar, migrated to East Pakistan then. And, while we are doing, and we have this project going on here, and also in Delhi, I just wanted to leave this thought with our people and with this excellent team, that some of the oral stories, if you can pick up from there, it'll be interesting. I, for one, could be of help. I know of a family which I met in South Africa. They left their village in Bihar, went over to Bangladesh. In 1971, they had to leave Bangladesh because they were Hindi-speaking stroke Urdu-speaking Muslims, and they came to Karachi. In Karachi, they did not find a home, and they had to leave Karachi, and then they came to Swaziland, and from Swaziland, they're now based in South Africa. And every year, they go back to their village in Bihar, in Darbhanga district. And when they go back to their village, people ask them, if you had to come back after 70 years, why did you leave in the first place? So, there are several emotional stories like these, which we need to tell and recount. But congratulations to Indiaspora and also to 1947 Archives for telling these beautiful stories. There are many aspects to these things. I would like to ask any of the three speakers could come on that. What are the difficulties you find as you document? What are the key difficulties? Oral traditions, there are several challenges. There could be social challenges, cultural challenges, etc. When you go to meet people, of course, in Delhi, we still have, and in other parts of India, we still have people who've been impacted. So there's a lot of material, a lot of stories which can be put together. A fascinating part of this history is that, people who were impacted by partition are the ones who are still very emotional about the connection. In fact, I must tell you that once we were going through some very important, very learned gentleman, while talking of partition, he made a very subtle difference between Vatan and Desh. He said, Vatan is the place where I was born, and Desh is the country where I live. So in a sense, if we try to put his understanding in our understanding of nationalism and nation states, it will not figure there. It's a totally new concept. So these are some of my thoughts, random thoughts I thought I'll share with the presenters. They made some very excellent points, but I would like to hear from them the challenges that they face in recording oral history.
Well, I could say from my perspective, since I'm in USA, I live in Florida. First of all, it's hard to find people who have experienced this trauma, because It's not so long, and many people are not living anymore. Some of them have a very hard time narrating those stories because of emotional reasons. They do not want to go through the pain of recounting those experiences. And the other thing is there are people who are available, who are there, but then we do not have volunteers to go to reach them out because they are far-flung places. We're all scattered. So these are some of the challenges we have. But now, of course, thank you, Guneeta ji, we have technology, and we are also able to interview them remotely. So that has facilitated, but still, the fact remains that there are far few people now surviving who are ready to tell their stories.
Thank you, Jasbir Bhatia ji. Your really, your talk was very engaging, I must say, and very emotional
Thank
for
you.
me as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhatia. Thank you so much, CG Ranveer. I believe we have a question next from Raj Mohan Gandhi in Illinois, a historian and the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. We'll unmute you and ask you to come on screen.
Okay. Thank you.
Fantastic. You're on.
Thank you very much. Well, let me first of all say how deeply moved I have been by all the three who have spoken, stirring recollections and accounts. And I also want to salute the Partition Archive for the absolutely incredible work that has already been done. I may be allowed to mention that my wife, who herself, with her family, they were also, they moved from Sindh towards India in 47. And so that was a factor, among other factors, in my wanting also to study the partition story. And my wife, Usha, and I, in 2005, we interviewed a fair number of people in different parts of India and in Lahore in Pakistan. And we also collected some oral histories of partition in these families. And these have been recorded in a book that I wrote, published in 2013, about this history of Punjab. And this has some of those stories. And I will be sending these, if I may, to Guneeta ji. And if those stories can also be made part of your archive, I would feel very privileged.
You would be honored.
That these stories we collected in 2005 from some Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims connected to Punjab. I've only, apart from appreciating and saying how inspired I am by the work that has been done and is ongoing, I would like to just share one thought, if I may, about the Radcliffe line that was mentioned. And Radcliffe line features in almost all accounts of partition. But one thing that I would like Pakistanis and Indians and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs also to understand is the following. Radcliffe was the head of a commission to draw the line in Punjab and to draw a line in Bengal. But he was only one of 5 members. The other 4 members, 2 were either Hindus and Sikhs or 2 Muslims. 2 Muslims and 2 Hindus in Bengal. 2 Muslims, 1 Sikh and 1 Hindu in Punjab. But because the Indians could not agree with themselves, so Radcliffe drew the line himself. If the Indians had agreed on a line, on a good line, Radcliffe would have had no choice but also to accept. So while it is natural, it is common, it is appropriate also to hold Radcliffe responsible, we should not forget that it was the failure of the Indian members of the commission. There were 4 of them. to agree that also contributed to the very, to the, you might say, absurdity in some cases of that line. So I just wanted to, this is one of the things that I learned during my research in the amazing story of Punjab and Bengal. So that's all. I have no question except to express my very deep gratitude for what is being done.
Thank you so much, Rajmohan. Thank you for being on. Thank you for your comments. In fact, I have received several comments in the chat box privately, expressing how deeply moved they are and expressing their thanks to the 1947 Partition Archives for the work that they do. So your sentiments are widely echoed. I know we are a little bit over the stated time, but I think this topic has, like we were saying at the outset, it's so emotive and it brings out so much in people wanting to engage that I think you won't mind if we go a little bit beyond. Our next question is from Ram Gada, an Indian American community leader in the state of Minnesota. So Ram, we will wait to unmute you and bring you on the screen.
Thank you, Sanjeev. This is a very moving story, moving oral collection. I like to say here in Minnesota, with Minnesota Historical Society, we have conducted oral history since 1994 for the early Indian immigrants came to Minnesota. In those interviews, there were several people who migrated from Pakistan. So, and there are many other people in Minnesota who have migrated either from East Pakistan or West Pakistan. So my question to the team is, are you interested to collect more stories so we can go each statewide? We can appeal to the people. For example, we can do in Minnesota, those who have migrated and their childhood experiences, and they are ready to do the oral history. And similarly, you can expand this project to rest of the states in the United States. Thank you.
That would be incredible. Yeah, we would love to collaborate with you on that. Maybe I can reach out via Sanjeev later.
Yes, please. We would be glad to conduct this as a process. We have an India Association of Minnesota. We have Minnesota Historical Society, where almost 100 oral histories have been preserved for years to come.
Wow, that's incredible.
Great. Thank you so much, Ram. I see the next hand raised. I see Rajvi Berry. Rajvi, if you want to go next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Guneeta, thank you so very much for initiating this. My actually late parents, both, unfortunately, were, I guess, partition survivors, if you will, left, unfortunately, Lahore and then moved over to India and then finally ended up emigrating here, but certainly had very, very, very painful experiences to share with us. However, at this point, I would say that if it's possible for you to maybe share on the chat about how we, as, I mean, I guess we're all first generation immigrants, at least in my case, in my brother's case, and some of our relatives. But if we could potentially help you, contribute, if you could at least put it on your chat as to if there is an FEIN number, et cetera, so we actually can help your cause, because that is probably the closest that we have come to, as far as, I mean, after listening to the stories of our parents and what they really had to endure through this, that would be great, because that's about the only thing I think we can do constructively going forward. And I certainly would be very, very interested in contributing and or helping in any way, shape or form. So thank you.
Thank you so much for mentioning that, Rajvi. Sorry, go ahead, Guneeta. I know you had something to say, and I think Rashina, who helped put this program together, had something to say on this very point as well. So I'll bring both of you in very quickly before moving on to the next question.
No, I was just going to say thank you. In terms of putting it on the chat, I'll maybe rely on Muncie a little bit. I think I don't have that access at this moment.
Okay. Can we?
Thank you for-
Yeah, we'll certainly put the requested material on the chat box. But Rashana, you have helped arrange this program, being involved in both organizations, Indiaspora and the Partition Archives, and I know that you had something to say quickly on this matter. Rashana?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say I've been involved with the work of the archive for the last 2-3 years, and I've been so impressed by the hard work that Guneeta, the team, and so many volunteers put in. They have collected stories from my husband's family that migrated from Pakistan, as well as I found out after the fact, my own family that stayed in India, but had, were impacted or influenced, by the partition. So I just think the work that the archive does to preserve these stories, to share them, and then to bridge the gap that unfortunately the national borders have, made so huge between citizens now of the 3 different countries and across the world is just amazing. And I would love to, just give a shout out to the archive for the work they do. And just, also ask for, support. It's a nonprofit organization. Most of the volunteers work on a volunteer basis, but it's a huge effort to train the oral historians to have the technology and the data storing, the data archiving capability. All those other things are just it's amazing how much work goes into making sure that this work is diligently collected, preserved, and authenticated. It's just the layers of work that is that we don't see. We just assume that somehow the stories populate, and then the fact that scholars are out there, like Guneeta was in the Sundarbans and in various remote parts, not only of India, of Pakistan, of Bangladesh, and all over the world. So I just want to say this organization is amazing. I know I have a vested interest in that. I have a family history from both mine and my husband's side that is relevant, but it's so important to all of us. So do everyone go to the 1947 Partition Archive website and find out there's so many ways to participate by funds, of course, but bringing out witnesses, as so many of you have brought up, and letting us know that we can connect with them and how to connect with them, so we can archive their stories by becoming story scholars, by spreading the word and everything. So I just want to thank you all for being here and listening, and thank you so much for the archive and Indiaspora for bringing this out.
Thank you, Rashana, for helping put this together, and for everyone in attendance. There is in the chat room, I think Mansi, my colleague, has posted the website for the 1947 Partition Archive. So if you would like to take a look at that, that'd be great. We have several other questions, and I think we could go on for another hour, literally, just based on the interest, not just the raised hands, but also in the chat that I'm receiving privately and publicly. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. We'll just do one last question. And Shikha Uberoy, I know that you've been texting me for several minutes, and then you raised your hand as well. So Shikha, if you want to ask your last question quickly, we have 3 minutes remaining, and then we'll have to wrap up.
I think Shikha may have dropped off. I don't see her.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Mansi. That's fine then. If she emails me, Guneeta, I'll make sure to convey her question to you. So, in that case, I think it's time we wrap up, being respectful of everybody's time. For anyone else who has questions and would like to ask them, feel free to email us at Indiaspora. Of course, you can email Guneeta directly, but you can email us at Indiaspora, and we can convey your comments or questions over to Guneeta. My own email address is sanjeev@indiaspora.org. The spelling of my name is on the screen, SANJEEV @indiaspora.org. But I'd like to end by saying thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, Guneeta, Jasbir, Erin. It was just an incredible event. Thank you so much. And to all of you participants for taking the time and spending a portion of your evening/morning, depending on where you are in the world, with us here today. Thanks so much. And with that, we'll conclude this event.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Thank you, Guneeta. It was very interesting to hear people. And that means there's a lot more work to do. That's what I think. Lot more work to do. And I'm sure it's going to be a great project.
Thank you for your contributions and making it so.